Welcome once again to The Odd Couple. Brick James Hambrick is
Yes,
here
sir.
with me today, and we are The Odd Couple.
We are the Odd Couple. Good to be here.
Now, Brick, we have a couple guests today that, well, this picture of us here makes us look kind of buff.
Well,
And
it did.
and I and I'm concerned that they're not going to be able to tell us apart from our special guest today.
Hey,
Would you introduce him to us?
yes, we are grateful to have on the Odd Couple today David and Holly Ashley. And they're recently, I said recently, within a year or so, relocated and moved to our community, but have already made great impact in our community. So
great.
welcome, Dave and Holly. And as you can see, I'm trying to be swole up. Dave has a ministry, and I'm going to let them talk about it, but he's known as Pastor Pump. And so welcome, and just tell us about what God is doing in your life and about your ministry here.
Absolutely. Well, Cross Strength Ministry and the pastor of Pump was formed by 35 years of myself doing personal training. I was a personal trainer for 35 years, and then somehow God invaded my life, and to seminary I went, and after
great.
completing my seminary degree, he basically said, no more working out with the body, let's now work with the spirit. Let's try to help people, not just physically, but spiritually, and find their place.
Great.
It's a different type of discipleship. And so out of all that, the pastor of Pump was birthed, Cross Strength Ministries was birthed, and then my wife and I, her heart is for the domestic violence. We
good
both
for
do
you.
victim
Good.
and offenders, and so she went out and wrote this complete curriculum, a Christ-centered curriculum for the victims
Really?
and offenders of domestic violence. And
That's
that's our
awesome.
big push right now. What I'm doing right now is my heart's in men's ministry, men's and kids, boys.
Yeah.
They respond a lot better to the pastor of Pump and that idea. But my goal is it's the fathers that I have a heart for those fathers, because
good.
as the father goes, so goes the family. As the family goes, so goes the church, and as the church goes, so goes the nation.
Yes.
And so we need to start the fathers. We have a world without fathers. We have a world without genders, and we have a world without masculinity. And so now we're apologizing for being men, and we
Yeah.
can't do that.
That's right.
God calls it men to lead, and we need to lead. And we're either going to lead to heaven or we're going to lead our families to hell. But we got to get on the right wagon, the right team, and we got to lead our families to heaven.
I like your passion.
Thank you.
This is in your heart, isn't
Oh,
it? This is
absolutely,
something you
yes.
feel strongly about.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
I've seen it. I took what I learned in the gym, that passion
Yeah.
people had for wanting to get better. They came in and said, Dave, I've tried everything on my own. I just can't get this done.
Right.
And so they basically surrendered to me to write them a program and to give them that encouragement and to
take them to the next level.
Yes,
Yeah.
take them through the pain and
Good.
the hurt and the suffering to get to that next level.
Man.
And so God just said, okay, now let's do this outside the physical realm. Let's do this in the spiritual realm. And so he gave us the program. He gave
Yes.
us the sword,
Yeah.
which is an offensive weapon.
The
sword
owner's
is not
manual.
the sword is not for defense; it's for offense.
Right.
And so we're supposed to take that and then disciple men, boys, and work with them in that arena.
Let me ask you this, Holly.
Yes.
How does, because even though you guys are one, being
Yes.
married, you're one, he has this ministry, Pastor Pump. You have your ministry in dealing with domestic violence and those survivors and things like that. How does your ministry and the ministry and your gifting, how does that complement what David is doing?
Okay. Well, I can tell you it's perfectly complemented, because on the flip side of not having a fatherless nation, we have a bunch of women who are not teaching younger women the standards of which we are to look for in the men that we date and then marry. Titus and 2 Timothy give us clear-cut guidelines of the men that we are to be bringing into our life, we are allowing to come into our lives. We are not giving our daughters the ammunition to fight off the schemes of the devil as they get older, they're falling into the temptation of society, which is exactly what I did, and they're using the peer pressure and the societal influence of non-Christian women to guide them. And our role as mothers is to raise up women who are godly, God-fearing women, and we're not doing that. We've lost that.
Now, you have some personal experience with this.
I certainly, I certainly do.
Can we
Yes,
talk about that
we
for a
sure
minute?
can. I was raised in a home where I was molested as a child by my grandfather. And it was that generation that my mother was raised in where we didn't talk about those issues.
Right.
And when I confronted my mom with what was going on, she said, "Well, honey, don't put yourself in that situation. You know, we
Oh,
all
my
know Grandpa's a
gosh.
pervert. Stay away
Yeah.
from Grandpa." Well, as a little girl who is babysat by Grandma and Grandpa, that's a little hard. That's a lot of
And you were how
responsibility to
old?
put on
Sure.
a little girl. I don't even remember how young I was when I first brought that to my mom's attention. Then I was gang
you were fairly
raped.
young.
I was very young.
Yeah.
I was gang raped by the boys that lived next to my grandparents when I was approximately 5. Oh, I didn't mention that one.
Really?
There was no sense. Why would
Because
I?
you knew nothing would be done.
Nothing was going to be done, and it was going to be my fault because I put myself in that situation. And I grew up with that mentality. When I was raped at 18 on a date rape, my first thought was, this is not going to be reported, and it was never reported because I put myself in that position. And that kind of stayed with me, that and I did hold some responsibility, and I'm not making light of that whatsoever. However, by the time I got to be in my early 20s, when Dave and I first started dating, I was a very angry, very bitter, very mean woman. And I had a society of psychologists and judicial personnel and people in my life who told me that I was allowed to be that way, that I was allowed
Because
to be.
you were a
I should have.
victim.
I was a victim.
Yeah.
And so for 25 years, I lived as a victim. By the time I was 30 years old, I had been married and divorced 4 times, was raising 2 children and making my living as a stripper. I had left the man of God, the biblical description and depiction of the man of God. I left him at the altar, and part of it was I didn't feel worthy, that I couldn't measure up. The other part of that was it was too good to be true. It was never going to last. These people didn't exist. I didn't believe it, and I didn't have that guiding force behind me.
And you didn't feel like you were worth it.
I didn't feel that I was worth it, but then the other half of that is I was so arrogant that I believed he needed to understand my victimization, and I should be allowed to be whatever kind of woman I deemed that I deserved, because I had been a victim, and I was a victim, and I was going to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. Had David and I got married when we were 20, I would have shredded him.
You would have crushed me.
I would have
Really?
absolutely
Yeah, she would have.
annihilated him. And God said, "Yeah, we're not doing this." And David and I went our separate ways. But God brought us back together 25 years later, and our paths crossed. Just
Wow.
sheer happenstance. And David and I were married then within 8 months. And because I knew, Lord, if you let me have another shot with him, I will never let him go. Had that not happened, I would have never been able to give David the respect that he deserves, because he never changed. I changed. I realized that to not be a victim meant don't be a victim. It meant grow up. Learn the precepts of God. Not only learn them and read them, but instill them into your daily walk.
Make
You
it-
have
make
to
it who you
walk
are.
the walk.
Right.
Yes. And I remember praying over this man that I was going to get married. I knew I was called to be married. I did not want to be alone. And I had a list. I still have it to this day, as a matter of fact, of what I was praying for. And I remember praying, Lord, I need to have a godly, God-fearing man in my life who will guide and direct me, but understand me and cherish me for the woman that I am and the garbage that I've been through. and be forgiving and loving. And I could tell you, it was just as
Man.
if God was
And
sitting
this
right
is the
next
guy?
to me. God told me he deserves the same.
That's awesome. You said something that I'd like to talk about just a little bit more.
Sure.
And, we're going to do this interview today, and we'll continue next week as well. Victim. When we identify ourselves by our struggles kind of dictate who we are. Your identity wasn't really victim, was it? Not identity. When you become a Christian, your identity is Christ.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
things really change at that point.
Yes, because biblically, you will not find anywhere in those 66 books where Jesus says you have a right to be a victim.
That's it.
It's not in there. What he says is leave the past behind. He says press on towards the mark. Strain for the prize.
Yes.
Never, not once, ever
for
did
you.
Jesus ever take a victim, whether it was a woman of adultery or whether it was the woman of the well who had 5 husbands living with another man. Never, ever once, not ever did he take him
Yeah.
and hug him and say, oh, tell me about it. No. He said, you know what? Go. Sin no more.
That's right.
Get on with it. You cannot live, and this is what I think affects our children so much. When their parents are living in victim mode,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
children feed off that.
Yeah.
They want to fix it. And when they can't fix it, they become angry and they can't figure it out. They can't figure out life. They need parents. They don't need victims.
One thing we're finding out
Absolutely.
that with youth, with our kids nowadays, is that it's almost like we push them out and say, "Hey, go and become successful."
Right.
You know, instead of setting them up for success
Oh,
with a
absolutely.
foundation. And so, man, what you're bringing, Harley, and what you guys have been through, your testimonies and your
Yes.
lives, and even here in our community today, again, you haven't been here long, but you're making a serious impact. I'm talking,
That's awesome.
that's one of the privileges or responsibilities of being chief of police here. I hear things. I hear things. So,
And you're hearing good things.
And I'm hearing good things
That's awesome.
of what you guys are doing in the community and the ministry and the gifting that God has given to you.
Hey, we're on
And-
call.
And it's
Whatever
just,
you need,
Hey, it's
let
just
us know.
a privilege and blessing to have you here,
Absolutely.
man.
Well, we're going to continue this next week, and we want to hear more from David as well, and figure out who this guy is all about. Would you, in our closing moments, speak to some of the people out there who have defined themselves as a victim? That's a big deal, isn't
Yes.
It is a
it? How do you get
big
from
deal.
victim
to
to
victory?
child of God? Victim to victory.
That's
I like that.
that's the name of her book. She's writing a book, and that's the name of
That's
her
the
book.
name of the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good for you.
From
Victim to
victory.
All right.
You know, I'm going to tell you one thing about my story, as awful and appalling as it is, there's a story that's going to come up right behind it that is twice as bad. And there's always going to be that, and especially living in this nation where it's so violent and it gets so bad, there's always going to be trouble. There's always going to be hurt and pain. But God wants us to be dependent on Him.
On him.
So He allows these things to happen in our life so that He can get the glory. And we have to surrender to His holiness because His holiness is more important than our comfort.
Amen.
Yes.
And so once we surrender, and once I finally got to that point in my life where I said, I can't do this,
Yes.
you have to do this, and just surrendered to whatever His will was. As much as I wanted to be married, if that was not His plan for me, so be it. That's when the healing begins. And it doesn't begin until the surrender happens and the repentance takes place.
Glory.
Yes.
Glory.
Amen.
Yes,
Amen.
That's pretty cool.
That's great, man.
I'm a blessed man, aren't I?
You are,
You are.
totally
I
blessed, man.
am.
That's
Let me tell
awesome.
you.
Man.
Well, folks, we're going to continue this discussion next time. Chief,
Man.
this is excellent.
This is hey,
This is good stuff.
This is awesome. We're privileged and honored to have you here on the Odd Couple, and
Yes.
we're gonna have you back And
We're going to have you back
man.
next week. And folks, next time we're going to talk a little more to David about, how do you do this? Now, I know what you're thinking. You guys look a lot alike. We'll ask that question.
Hey,
And we want to find out about the pastor of Pump
Absolutely.
next time as well. So, folks, thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining the Odd Couple.
Couple.
All right. God bless you.
peace.